Krist Novoselic's importance in Nirvana is sometimes overlooked, even though he was such a key member of that band. In this video, I'm going to share with you a few stories about Krist Novoselic. Some of these are funny stories, some of them are more serious. The clips in these videos are from the interviews I've done with various Nirvana-related people, including Steve Albini, Charles Peterson, Bruce Pavitt, Ernie Bailey, and Jack Endino. Is it true that they set their pants on fire when you guys finished the record?
There's a cleaning solvent that you use to clean the tape heads on the tape machines, which is very flammable. And you can also splash that solvent on something else and set it on fire. And so we were setting a lot of stuff on fire during the session, just, jackass entertainment sort of stuff. There's a photo somewhere, I can't remember who took it, but there was an Instamatic or a Polaroid photo of Dave Grohl's ass on fire, and I think it's Krist Novoselic is lighting a cigar off of the fire that's on Dave Grohl's ass.
I mean, yeah, Krist was, Krist definitely liked pranks and was just, first time I met Krist Novoselic, was out at Bob Whitaker, one of his tour managers' cabin out on the Washington coast. And we were all down on the beach at night having a fire, and all of a sudden this big tall guy shows up with like no clothes on, runs down, jumps through the fire, and runs off screaming down the beach. And I'm like, what the hell? And Bob's like, it's Krist Novoselic. He's the bass player in Nirvana. Well, I'm like, okay.
I have a copy of Nevermind, and on the back of the CD, there's the DGC logo. And right beside it, there's the Sub Pop logo, even though Sub Pop wasn't involved in the release of Nevermind. So how come the Sub Pop logo is on Nevermind? And also, what was the, legal process like getting Nirvana off of Sub Pop and onto DGC?
Well, what happened was, I'll give you the story. Nirvana signed to a 3-record deal. And that's
with you guys or with them?
With us. And that's, okay, I'm going to tell you a story here. This is some stuff. At that time in the 80s, typically indie labels didn't work with contracts. They didn't have money for attorneys, right? So it was always a handshake deal. Hey, we'll split the profit. That was just the way indie labels did business. It's a handshake deal. But in 89, the summer of 89, a few months after Bleach had been out, Krist Novoselic came to my house and in a fairly aggressive way insisted that we sign them to an actual contract, okay, which totally saved our ass in the end, right? So We had no money for an attorney, so I called Poneman. He went to the library, he Xeroxed or photocopied a boilerplate contract, filled in Nirvana, cost us 10 cents, right? They come in, they sign it, and because we had that contract, when Nirvana decided to jump to a major label, using the recording of their second album that we thought we were going to release with Butch Vig. Again, we sent them to Butch Vig in Madison. They recorded the album. They came back, but what we didn't know is that they were sending that out as a demo to major labels. This is how it goes. So DGC stepped in and said, we're taking these guys. You're just going to have to deal with it, but we'll negotiate, a settlement. So it was kind of a bittersweet moment. They left the label. We were a little heartbroken, but that's life in the biz. But because they were signed to 2 more records, we were able to fine-tune the negotiation, get that logo on Nevermind, which is definitely a source of pride. We got royalties from In Utero and Nevermind, so that really helped us out tremendously. But it never would have happened if Krist Novoselic hadn't come to my house and demanded a contract. So life's funny that way. Sub Pop would have gone out of business 30 years ago if Novoselic hadn't asked for that contract. So sometimes these little things can turn your whole life around.
Krist Novoselic, she, obviously when you have a band with Kurt and Dave, like you got 2 powerhouses, sometimes he can be overlooked, but he was so integral to the band as well. In your experience working with him, how is he like as a musician and a person?
He's fantastic. I mean, he's highly underrated, or at least overshadowed as a musician. But he's such a huge part of Nirvana. And it's like, I think Dave once said, I played in so many shows. He said, how many shows Krist played in? He said all of them. And that's really true. And I know that from stories that Krist told me, like even in the early days, Krist was doing a lot of the load-ins. Krist was very protective of Kurt. It was very much a Sam and Frodo kind of a thing. I mean, Krist really fostered Kurt's ability to do what he did. And I think that you really need these two elements. And, we tend to gravitate towards the one who's, he's the singer-songwriter who's out front. And then, and I think that Krist was perfectly happy to be in the background and let Kurt get all the attention, because it was very overwhelming for everyone. And I think he was as private of a person as Kurt was, but he had the luxury of not having all the attention.
Do you have any funny memories of Krist Novoselic in particular? Because he was a prankster too, right?
Yeah, and he and I were very close during that time and neighbors, and there are so many stories. We did so much crazy stuff together, and it was hilarious. One of my favorite, I think one of the funniest moments with him was, I remember going over to his house and we were hanging out, and I think that it was like a last minute thing. He said to me that I think it was the Melvins were playing down at this club called Rock Candy in Seattle. And he asked if I wanted to go down there. And I said, yeah, sure, let's go down there. Let's just go surprise him. We won't even, call or try to get on the list or whatever. So we were standing out in line waiting for the doors to open, waiting in line for the Melvins. And so at one point, I think they were kind of late opening the doors. And there's a lot of people in the line who are looking at this, this guy, he's really tall, and it's obviously Krist from Nirvana. And at one point, Krist gets kind of impatient, and I think he says something like, come on, open the doors. He said, don't you guys know who I am? And we're like, there's this moment of silence. It was like, oh no. And he goes, I played Latka in the hit TV series Taxi. And so with that, it was just incredible, because he looks so much like him, and it's just his sense of humor is so off the charts.
When it comes to Nirvana, obviously with two superstars like Kurt and Dave, sometimes Krist gets looked over, but he was super important to that band. Working with Krist, how was he like in the studio?
Great. One take.
Really?
Yeah. He's very good. He's very natural. He knows the parts. He just does it. I mean, Krist is quick. He gets what he's doing. I mean, he's got a natural feel for melodic bass lines. Accurate player, very tight, does what he wants to do. And in later years, he got really good at playing accordion, which is not easy.
Yeah.
He's put a lot of time into learning the accordion, actually, which in his own band, Giants in the Trees, that I worked on their first album, recorded much of it and mixed it and mastered it, and then I ended up mastering their second record too. He plays bass and accordion on those records. He's very good, and sometimes he writes big riffs on the bass. I also did 2 records for Flipper when he was in that band, which was another story entirely. Flipper were an interesting bunch of guys, shall we say.
That's cool. I was speaking a little earlier this year with Ernie Bailey, and he basically, in his view, he said the best way to look at Kurt and Krist is Frodo and Sam. That's kind of how his view of them was. Do you agree with that?
Yes. That's a pretty good way to look at it, actually, in a way. Except that Sam is like twice as big. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, actually. But who is Gandalf? That's the question.
That's true.
And who is Sauron?
That is true. I am also of the theory that, we're going off topic, but they could have just taken the eagle straight from the Shire to Mount Doom. In my view, I'm one of those guys.
Yeah, you were watching the same cartoon that I saw, actually. Yeah, why didn't they think of that? You'll have to ask J.R.R., actually.
That's very funny.
But, yeah. When my band Skin Yard was doing our last tour, which was a tour of Europe in October, November of 1991, toward the end of our tour, we had a show. Somehow our booking agents got together and we got added to a bill with Nirvana at a club called the Arena. It wasn't an arena, it was a club. It just was called the Arena in Vienna, Austria. And it was Nirvana and Urge Overkill, and Skinyard got added as the opening act. And interestingly enough, we hadn't seen them in months, and this was after, it was a club show, but it was packed and fully sold out because Nevermind had just been out for like a month or two, and everyone in Europe knew about it. The band was blowing up like right then. But they had to finish this club tour they were doing. And our equipment had been stolen in Rome a couple of weeks, maybe a week or so before that. Our guitars were stolen out of our van. So we had finished literally the last 4 or 5 shows of our tour. We had to use borrowed guitars from whatever opening band played with us because we were doing our own headline tour. But this one show, we got added to the Nirvana bill. And we had no bass and no guitar. And so we had to basically say, hey, can we borrow? And Nirvana was going to let us use their equipment, but Kurt's guitars were all left-handed. And he was ready to give me a guitar. He was going to give me one of his, Jag Stangs or whatever the heck he was playing, but it was a lefty. And he said, well, I can have my tech flip the bridge around for you, but we were sound checking right then. I was like, come on, and Krist offered to let our bass player, Pat, use one of his basses, but Krist, being somewhat tall, needed 2 guitar straps duct taped together end to end because he likes to play the bass low, plus he's really tall. So his bass had 2 guitar straps end to end, also duct taped to the bass itself, so the strap wouldn't come off. So I remember he put it on our bass player, who is tall but not excessively tall, and the bass hung, somewhere below his knees. And we all had a good laugh about it, actually, and then we went to Urge Overkill and begged them very nicely if we could borrow their instruments, for our show. And they were I suspect they had heard a little bit about Nirvana smashing equipment, and they kind of thought, oh, here's another Seattle band. And they were very now you're not going to damage these instruments, are you? They were very do not smash our guitars, and we're just like, no, that's not our thing. We're very respectful. I've been playing the same guitar for 5 years. I had to, because, the guy in Urge Overkill, he had a nice Gretsch guitar that he let me play for our show. And, I just had to sort of ease his fears that we were not another Seattle instrument smashing outfit. So, Urge Overkill very kindly let us use their guitar and bass. And we had one more show with Urge Overkill, I think the next night in another part of Austria. And they let us use their instruments. But that was funny, actually. The Nirvana people were ready to help out, but it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.